Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to the channel RPG with DBJ, and I am your host, DBJ. Just imagine yourself standing on the prow of an airship, multiple giant bladders taken and cured from the slaying of giant aerial kraken being used to lift that aerial ship through the sky, taking it across the landscape. You see the clouds below you, prismatic and boiling with an internal energy you know that's been dangerous for generations. Strange lightning blasting through it. And then, as you pierce through the clouds, the captain yells out a warning, and you run to the front, and you see before you the peaks of a few mountaintops. The tops of the mountains seemingly cut with a razor, flat on the top, some of them spewing out weird and strange colored steam into the air. And as you get closer, and the clouds move, and the air blows away the mist and steam coming from them, you see there is a lake below you, and you feel the cold chill as you've traveled north, and nowhere in sight other than these few peaks do you see land at all. So today is World Building Wednesday, and on this channel we take a subject and we kind of talk about it all week long. And on World Building Wednesday, we take that same subject, and we basically build a world around that particular thing. And whatever that thing is, it is the thing that is dominating our setting. And we start from that side of the equation. And our subject for this week, and especially today, is the Caldera, the idea of a lake inside of a dormant volcano and a community that may live in and around it. And so, what if the only thing available to the entire population, or the limited population there is of this world, the only safe havens are calderas in the first place? So I'm imagining it's not just that they exist, but they exist as the only safe havens, as safe as a caldera could be, for the population of this world. And I'm imagining them existing much like a series of islands or archipelagos or whatnot, except the islands of safety are the upper peaks of the islands of safety are the upper peaks of this world. And sure, there may be some limited travel, albeit quite dangerous, between the peaks of these volcanic regions, but that there's for whatever reason, you could make it a cataclysm. This could be more science fiction-y, where the heavier, more dangerous gases are below the mountainous peaks. But whatever the case may be, land cannot be seen below. It's just a roiling mass of I don't know, thunderous chromatic clouds of various harmful, acidic, poisonous, toxic fumes and things below a certain altitude, laced with, I don't know, arcs of lightning and energy or something like that. And of course, the people live in and around the calderas. The reason why I didn't specify there being literally just one is because you might not want to bound your regions as tightly, but I could imagine there being the ability for people to, once they've been able to leave, to travel to these other locations. So again, we talk about the fact that the calderas are a confluence of basically all four elements: high altitudes, aerial locations, high winds, storms. You might want to include electrical arcs and blizzards and that kind of thing. So you have yourself, and of course, thin air, if you want to even go as far as having thin air, or hell, a high enough altitude, you can go into airless void if you want to mimic the the effects of real world geological formations and gravity and such and oxygen. You can even have thin to vacuum if you go high enough. There's also with along with air, of course, we have poisonous gases and things coming out of the ground or the sky. So we have air, we have earth, of course, giant volcanic mountain with a from a seen from a vast distance, as if someone took a sword and like sliced off a chunk off the top. It again, it doesn't need to be flat, seen from a distance. Volcanic, as a matter of fact, quite violent volcanoes have a tendency to erupt in a manner in which it explodes quite a chunk off the top of it. But anyway, you do have the earth and whether you're talking about the outer skin of the mountain, the inner portions, if you want it populated by a society, you could have carved dungeons and passageways and havens and things, or it could be left raw, and you have horizontal and vertical spirals and cavities and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, we have fire and water. The fire being from primarily probably from the volcanic activity, and the water being the lake, the giant lake that is in the capstone, the very top of the area. Now, we did talk about mixing and matching the different elemental forces, but in world building, I'm sure the minute you start talking about elemental things, there's lots of like adversaries that you can include in your game that represent the pinnacles of those elemental forces and the powers that come from them. Even the idea that the Caldera itself is like a arcane engine of some sort, maybe sitting on a ley line, or there's some kind of possible way to excavate some kind of mage stone or element that's inside of the caldera that powers magic and energy and such, as well as the fact that of course, you go to the capital sized monsters, the kaiju sized monsters that could possibly live inside of the caldera. Now, not that there wouldn't be those creatures that exist. Right off the top of my head, I can't imagine an entire society living in around the upper lip of a caldera, and also there being something large enough to use the inside like a nest or something. But I suppose there could be some kind of massive monster or something that might either be manipulated by the people, or it lives in some kind of like harmonious blending of the two. But each caldera, if you have multiples of them, they could each have their own themes, if you will. The one's towards the north. Maybe there's one towards the north, and there's one that's houses a white dragon. There's others where there's dangerous yetis that are able to breathe some of the poisonous air below, and during seasonal mating, or maybe just because they're bloodthirsty and hungry or something, they scale up the side of the mountains to go after the snow-capped peaks of the people that live in the wintry caldera, which is something I didn't bring up. The idea that you could have uh, a, a dormant volcano in every place from the tropics on our Earth all the way up into the Arctic regions, and nothing says you can't do that as well for a caldera in your world, right? So you could have a caldera that's essentially, surrounded by deserts, and it's like basically very, instead of a lake on the inside of it, it is mostly dry land with maybe just periodic locations of moisture, representing like an oasis or something. A giant volcano filled with a desert would be kind of weird, but and brutal, but would be kind of cool, as well as a caldera that's basically you know, a frozen wasteland or something like that, with a big, maybe a frozen lake that you could pilot like wooden skates across it, basically like small dinghies up to major sailing vessels, but instead of sailing across water, or even, you know, across a frozen, like like the Titanic or something, blasting through ice caps or something, it could be completely frozen and flat, and there could be like giant ice skates on the bottom of these ships, and their pilot they you pilot them by wind or something. I never thought about that, but yeah, you could have a lot of fun with this idea. And again, I brought up the word bounded. Sometimes you can have a lot of fun with bounding the parameters in which people can explore, and by bounding those distances in a very hard kind of manner, it allows you to have like a an easy way to make something very insular and dynamic without an easy out by being able to travel far away from where you're located. What I mean is, when you have a bounded location and you also have a society, you have no other recourse but to deal with the people in and around you. And it's a great way to get rid of like the old classic murder hoboism, or player characters like basically setting fire to everything and running away and not looking back. If you have bounded locations, it means that they have to take care of their safe havens. And sure, you're going to get players who are going to want to set fire to things and burn bridges and such. But the idea, the term burning bridges really applies to bounded locations, because they know that, you know, once you do this, you can't go back. And especially if you have a tight enough community where if you harm one, you harm everyone, and you're a threat to everyone. Much like Vampire the Masquerade role playing game and all its derivations, they 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 focused around like clans or tribes, and there was usually this undercurrent like, you know what, sure, you're on your own, you're powerful, but if you harm the running theme was that if you harm one, that the rest of them, you harm everyone. Hey Rickard, yeah, says Rickard over on Twitch says, you really think bounded locations will really cure murder hoboism? Really? Okay, maybe not, but I suppose if you layer it thick enough on your players right away, maybe when you lay the smackdown on the first player to get out of hand, it's like the other players, while they might get a little pissed, might be like, "Oh yeah, right, you did say that over like a 4 hour conversation during session zero that we all agreed to. Wow, I didn't think you meant it, but okay, damn." Yeah. By the way, those who don't know, this show is simulcast over three platforms. We have a Discord server. Which I didn't join the video. I apologize for that. We have a Discord server. We also go live on Twitch and YouTube, both, you know, with audio and video. So if you would like to join the channel live, you can use any of those three platforms. And this is, of course, is broadcast Monday through Friday. So Doombot's back. Hey, what's up? The Also with a bounded location, we don't necessarily have to limit ourselves to horizontal locations. Like, you know, just because you're up inside the bowl of the Caldera, we can have vertical communities, either living on the outside skin. Again, talked about the idea of a community living around the inner bowl of the Caldera, and you could really pull on the distances involved in that. And maybe there are or maybe the majority of the population lives on the upper reaches of the bowl, if there's, of course, breathable air and things aren't poisonous and deadly. Although there could possibly be communities that live in calderas that are quite poisonous and deadly, which would be a great place if you want to go a little cliche. You want to go a little cliche. You could have your goblinoids living in the dangerous, poisonous areas, and they're constantly leaving their private caldera to go out on, I don't know, flying monsters, flying pterodactyls or giant bats or whatever. I don't know, buzzards or something, airships and whatnot, and flying over to get to other calderas. Which I think with a setting like this, you could have a lot of fun pulling out your rules for or coming up with your own rules for like airships, sailing ships, mounted combat, all the rules for like running, jumping, leaping, climbing is going to be pretty important, as well as some of your aquatic rules, holding breath, the effects of various types of magic and actions underwater, that kind of thing. So I think you really can get a good blend, especially if you're someone who, let's say you're a game master that really doesn't like setting things in the same place twice. Much like the affliction of player characters that constantly want to design yet one more new player character. Like, oh, I don't want to play my druid anymore. I've got this great idea for a paladin or something. If you're game masters, it's the same way where I don't know, you've watched a movie like Mad Max Fury Road in a big desert or something, and you're like, I got a great idea. And then next week you're like, I want to do a piracy thing. I think this lends itself to that, where you can have the same setting and have the players engage in it and then change it up quite a bit. Like you could do a classic Underdark with the Drow and or Drow, or however you, Dark Elves or something, and I don't know, Mind Flayers or whatever. People that love their Underdark settings, and then very easily flow into I want to do a like a sailing ship piracy type of game. Okay, great. So now you've moved from the lower reaches up into the upper parts, and then you're like, okay, and then you say, well, you know what? Instead of that, let's do some like Uncharted Island stuff, and you're like, all right, great. Maybe there's some Uncharted Islands on in and around your upper basin of your caldera. So I think it really lends itself to that as well when it comes to world building, and then if you have multiple calderas in your world, you could also really use each caldera as its own island of sorts, or worlds, based on how big or large or small you want to make them and how arcane they are. I ended yesterday with the idea that if you go through the cloud cover of the caldera, that the inner bowl of the caldera might be larger or even more fantastical than physics would make it seem, so that let's say the upper bowl diameter, let's say, is only like, say, 3 miles or something, but once you pierce that layer, maybe the inside is well past that, hundreds of them, right? Rickard says, would a dice-sphere just be a never-ending caldera? It would. Wow, it would seem like it from wherever you're standing, right? Because the edges of the bowl just keep reaching up and stretching out to the horizon. So, yeah. I guess a ring world would look like a caldera to someone, at least from a north south or east west kind of view, where it seems to roll and then curve up and away or something, which would be kind of that. I think from a visual standpoint, that might look kind of weird too, especially if the caldera's main basin has a lot of solid features in it, where it's not just one big giant lake, but there are some solid locations or features and such. And then in the distance, instead of the horizon curving down, your horizon is constantly curving up into the sky, with maybe from where you're standing, it just looks like a dark line, but as you get closer, you can see like maybe jagged peaks or something like that. Yep. Yeah, Deadman says, check out Olaf from Gate Crashing for Eclipse Phase. Yeah, yeah. So if you want to go sci-fi with this, I could imagine this being on these being like the safer plateaus on a poisonous planet. Again, if there's only calderas, you have the danger of dipping down into these like poisonous clouds or something, and of course you know you don't want to dump anyone or anything off the outer portion of the caldera because it'll roll down the volcanic mount into some place and be forgotten. Which I suppose once you start talking about places you can never go to and never see, I guess you're kind of labeling. You're kind of asking your players to want to investigate it in the first place. So you might want to tell your players like, yeah, I'm telling you this because for reals, there isn't anything down there, and it's all poisonous, and your PC will die. Period. End of story. You might want to say that up front, because the first thing they're going to want to do is let's take the airship and leave the caldera and go down into the clouds, right? So you got to be careful of that too. Faulty Doombot says, a cool thought. If the world was in some kind of nuclear winter or ice age, a caldera would be one of the few places with natural heat that could allow people to live and not freeze to death. People and races might fight over them for that reason as well. Yes, absolutely. I was kind of thinking about that, like you said, like a nuclear winter, an ice age, some kind of cataclysm that blasted the world, and so these are the only true places where humanity could really live and survive. Like if it's an ice age, it doesn't necessarily need to be like acid clouds that are below a certain level. It could just be the rest of the world is nothing but, it's not just frozen, but it's like in stasis where there's miles and miles of like ice and frozen tundra, and floating above the clouds and things, and getting to the caldera where it's warmer with its hot springs and things of that nature might be the only place for people to survive. And nature may have adapted to this change, so a lot of the animals and creatures and natural habitat may have flowed into the calderas for its own safety. Plant life growing in the upper basin because that's where seeds could take hold. Insects having had millennia ago brought pollen and things like that to these areas. So it could be a little bit of the an arc idea as well, where there's like brand new proto life or something happening in these calderas. With an ice age, it could be something that has happened to this world periodically, and the PCs are going through that era of society. The first snow coming to Winterfell or something kind of thing, right? Or King's Landing rather. It could be, this is, the PCs are portraying their characters through the ice age of your world, which at some point the ice age will end, and everyone's vying to survive because they know that once the ice age ends, if they've got the power, they're going to be the kings and queens of this new world. They just have to survive this. They have to survive with both their enemies and their allies. And so there could be like a Cold War kind of thing where everyone's vying for control, knowing that at once they need to keep their power so that they're not eliminated and kicked out of the location. But at the same time, they also can't eliminate everyone because they know that if they make open threats against certain factions, that all the other factions now have an excuse to pile on a rabbit and kick their ass out, right? So I could see something like that. Yeah, Rickard says I'll save the sci-fi stuff for Friday. Yeah, I'm gonna have. I'm thinking I'm gonna have to uh, change the theme for Friday because I'm finding out that I was quite wrong about the fact that Sci-Fi Fridays, our future Fridays, wouldn't have anything to do with our weekly theme, but I'm thinking that it's going to flow right back into it. So hell yeah. And Faulty Doombot says you should read the fifth season if you haven't already. It has a similar thingy with a cycle of powerful earthquakes. I'm not certain with the reference. Read the fifth season. Are you? Oh, you're referencing. Sorry, I think I get it. Yes. A reference for yesterday, the anime. Rickard says Caldera, that is really a crater from a meteor strike. The meteor radiates an aura that lures animals and people into the caldera, where the aura is so strong they can't leave. The the same was done for, or similarly done for, Genesis that I have been bully about. The Genesis RPG, where it's a post-apocalyptic setting, but meteorite strikes and struck the Earth, and they struck the Earth so hard that it transformed the landscape, but also created these craters with spores in them or something. So I could imagine, in a caldera that's not. Yes, I understand that it specifically relates to a volcano with a lake in it, but we're talking fantasy and science fiction here and world building. So yeah, you could very easily have this be a crater with something in it like spores or radiation or a fallen psychic godling or something like that that's in the inside of it, and it draws things towards it. Hell, it could be the death cries, death throes of something very powerful that has drawn, animals and people and even plant life to it to allow it to grow. Maybe even there's a sentient hand involved to save humanity. That the inside basin of these calderas is literally like night and day. The outside is poisonous and harmful and frozen, and then the inside is like a pristine jungle of some sort. I could see world building and using that, especially if you want to. Oh, the fifth season is actually the name. I didn't realize. Yeah, be careful of references to things, because I'm coming. You're thinking of it because you know what you're thinking of. I'm coming at it cold, and I might not even have a reference to it at all. Yeah, but anyway, Faulty Doombot says the fifth season is a novel. Your comments about the cycle of ice ages made me think of it. Okay, perfect. And as a matter of fact, might even have a chance to check it out. Maybe see if it's on the audiobook or something. But yeah, the idea of using the using the environment to shape some of your storytelling, like you said, like an ice age, or the calderas being a safe haven for people to go to, especially if you want to. If the society in a caldera is brand new, basically it's where refugees have gone because of whatever cataclysmic event is forcing people to go to these safe havens. That would be pretty cool if the player characters now are responsible for the safety of a larger community, and tying that into player character, like, shall I say, like, progression. So it's not just about them. It's not about them being murder hobos. It's about them keeping a society together. I like that idea as well. I know I've brought that up before about tying even mechanical aspects to player characters to a living, breathing community. And although the reason why I like that is because it gives the player characters not only something else to really sink their teeth into, like if you were using Blades in the Dark has a gang mechanic where all the player characters have their own character sheets, and then there's a character sheet for the gang. I suppose you could, if you wanted to, get into the deep waters, you could make a character sheet for the community, or something a little, maybe a little more manageable. Maybe like in fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, you have hit dice. You could tie your hit dice to the community so that in order to use them or maybe engage in some of the more advanced healing or faster healing or something, as long as you go back to your community, you're able to progress or something like that. I could see something where the player characters need to have the community survive. I don't know if I would start counting population numbers like there's 87 and if you go below 52 there's no way they'll survive or so. Like I don't know if I would go to that extent, but yeah, I could see that. I could see tying, and of course, you could always tie like flaws and bonds and ideals and all that kind of crap to your community. And what a great way for very divergent personality types to have a common goal. We all know that to tie a party together, you want to have something, a unifying event or circumstance, and this is a great way to do it. Where the classic paladin character wants to represent like the law and the justice and the order, to be a public icon for the community, whereas of course the roguish assassin or something who's like, we need to I'll be the one to do the dangerous things and the brutal things so that the community doesn't have to, and while both are trying to support the community. And what a great way for player characters, again, different methods but they want the same results. Ricker says, so really the center of the caldera in the depth of the lake is actually the resting place of uh-oh, Riley? Riley, I guess it's pronounced. Yeah, representing the law, you say? I am the law. Judge Dredd. Hey, maybe to keep the peace in one of these calderas, it is like, it's judge, jury, executioner, because if we don't, we're all going to die from trying to backstab each other or something like that. I suppose, like you said, with a elder god kind of thing, if you want to go, not classic, but if you want to do a Call of Cthulhu draw with these calderas, maybe there is, you want to create horror and something sinister about all the people that have to maintain their lives here. And so that maybe there's an underlying theme that, what, we're all going to die at some point. It's just a matter of who lives the longest, which is usually a theme when it comes to anything related to Lovecraftian horror. But maybe there is something that has to deal with it, especially if, like, an ice age or a cataclysm was the event that forced people to go to the calderas in the first place, which from their horror and nightmares and their dreams or something is fueling the birth of these Lovecraftian monsters that are the size of kaiju that want to come out of the calderas in the first place, like, I don't know, like a botfly coming out of a pus-filled wound or something in the planet or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I thought Riley was one of the Lovecraftian creatures, but it's the city where Cthulhu sleeps. Which, depending on which story you're thinking of, either the elder gods come from, or what kind of setting you're thinking of. Either the elder gods come from the outer reaches of unknown space, or they come from the deep, dark pits of the earth and the ocean. Or maybe a combination of the two or something. Yeah, now, if the caldera is maybe it is the resting place of these, like, dark gods or something, you could, in this world, layer something where not only are the player characters, this is where their capabilities come from, but their desires to keep them asleep, while there might be other factions out there trying to awaken them. So that would be kind of a different spin on the adventuring party, where it's not an adventure to go out and beat up evil and, steal people's stuff out of their dungeons. It could be that there are these rituals or minerals or something that's keeping something dormant inside of at least one or more of the calderas the PCs are adventuring in, and stopping the other factions, or basically surviving long enough for the cataclysm to come to an end before assembling an army, a military, or resources large enough to slay the thing before it awakens. I don't know. PCs are more likely than not to like find the closest like napalm or nuclear bomb version in your world and drop it down in one of these calderas. So you might want to be a little careful with that, unless it's like unless somewhere deep in the volcanic region it's a portal to another world that you really can't get to until the creature on the other side pierces through the thin membrane to our world, maybe? I don't know. Rickard goes on to say the evil, twisted druidic cult causes the cataclysm that drives the people to the safety of the caldera, where they will feed their master and in doing so awaken it. I I like the idea of evil winning, because too many times you hear about the evil. Evil's got their plot. Evil says, I want to do the evil thing. I don't know, awaken the thing, cause the portal to open, end all life, blah, blah, blah. And very rarely does evil actually win. But if the PCs are living in a world where evil has already won, again, I was mentioning this before we got started. One of the Kickstarters I have is a Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, in a setting where basically the dismembered lord has won, and the PCs are living in and around a world where evil's won, and there's like armies and military that's spawned by controlled by evil, and people are backstabbing each other because they're telling on each other to get, greater, some kind of greater status in this world where evil is won. This may be a version of that, where the Druidic cult has caused the cataclysm to force people to go into the calderas in the first place, knowing that, okay, we can't leave, but we can't stay. What the hell are we doing here, right? Like, we're just being fed. We're putting fed into the grinder, the meat grinder of evil. Which I suppose if the lake one day drains and there's nothing but a massive lamprey like mouth and inside of the caldera, that might be a pretty nasty but poignant way to end your setting, where you're like, all right, Ice Age is over, and the mouth opens and swallows everybody, and everybody make new characters. you know. Yeah, Rickard says, evil never wins, though. Even in stories about where they have won, they have always just won the battle, but not the war. Quite true. Well, I think because it evil never winning is much like goodness never winning, right? There's no story to tell. If there's no conflict, there's no drama, there's no story. So the idea that evil has won, period, would be pretty daunting, right? Because, and it's also a measure of time as well. Some you If you measure a specific period of time, evil has won until they haven't, right? But if you end the time period up until the point at which they haven't lost yet, then they did win. It's just time periods. It's the classic living happily ever after, right? Well, if you follow time long enough, does happily ever after really mean happily ever after? Depends on how far you go, So yeah, it's all about time. Yeah, Rickard says, yeah, it's always the Empire Strikes Back, not total victory. Well, the Empire did win. Like I said, the Empire did win. They won. They didn't lose. Now there was an uprising, and at one point they did lose, but they did win. Just like goodness won until the Empire won. It's It's all semantics. If you if you are unaware of the idea that goodness has risen up in your storyline, then evil did win until they didn't, right? So every story is like that. If you follow the timeline out far enough, where it says, yeah. Faulty Doombot says, depends on the perspective of the story. If the story is told from evil perspective, you could expect that they will win at the end because as the readers because as the readers we are rooting for them. Exactly. Like it's it that is always the case when it comes to good and evil stories and perspectives and timelines, right? You could the Joker movie is a perfect example of Joker winning, who's evil. You're, I'm being very generalized, until he doesn't win. Yep, yeah, yeah. But it's semantics. It's all semantics. And like I said, there's no story if there's no drama. So if evil won, what would you be? There's nothing. There's no story to tell. Yeah, evil won. They've crushed. They've literally crushed all goodness, and evil has won. Great. Okay, it's your story's done at that point, unless you leave a hint of something. It's the same way with stories where they start out with goodness, right? The capital city of goodness with all the goody two shoes people who it's peace everlasting, is there is no story there unless there is some kind of like machinations by a, I don't know, a younger noble that wants to make their to split the, kill the king and take over the land and et cetera, et cetera. So you're just playing with semantics on that point. The it's much like this, like we're talking about with the calderas and like the people having to go there because of an ice age or cataclysm or something like that. Depending on how long the safety of a caldera it represents a place for the people to live could be measured in a heartbeat compared to the rest of society that would that has existed before fleeing to the calderas and afterwards. So maybe the people that live in the calderas, it's only like two or three generations before, I don't know, the arcane radiation or the ice age or the poisonous gases or the I don't the evil Lovecraftian creatures finally put to rest or something before everyone's able to leave the mountainous volcanic area and go back out into the world. So if it's only three generations, but there's 50 generations before and afterwards, it's just a blip on the map. So you're always referring to things based on the perspectives of the individuals at that time, based on their particular motivations. So every story is either measured in extremely long time periods or very short, quick, spiky time periods. I would say in this country, like hippie culture, at one point you could claim was a blip on the map of time, but during its heyday, hippie culture thought it won, that it became the way of life and how people should progress forward, but it's all captured from the moments and perspectives of people that are in it. I don't know why why you're like focused on that, Rickard. Like he says, I agree that there's not a story to tell, but I don't agree that they have won a victory. It's a victory, but not the victory. But then you would have to end time itself, right? You could say evil has won. Period. End of story. But then that's the end of the story. There's no time period after that, no matter how large you measure it by your accounting, right? So you're there. There is no such thing as evil has always won or good has won. Period. End of story. Unless that's literally the end of the story, in which case, yeah, you're right, but then there's no more story. Right? It's the conundrum of comic books and superheroes, right? It's the Spider-Man has defeated all of his villains. Yay! Shrug. There has to be something new. Otherwise, there isn't anything to tell except sunset happily ever after, and then or the opposite, evil's won happily ever after. We are done. I suppose you could claim that that in, say, classic Dungeons and Dragons, all of the lower planes are the equivalent of all of evil having won over their domain, if you wanted to go that way, based on where they're located. Yeah. We've segued way too far into things that have not much to do with what we're talking about today, but it's a thing, right? And then you get the semantics of what good and evil is and all that kind of stuff, and uh, it, it, all that is pretty useless if you're trying to tell a story or create a setting. Which I suppose with world building, there's an important part of like not having not just monocultures, but establishing mono societies and reasons for it. Meaning, like, let's say, yeah, East versus West slopes of the Caldera. Yeah, I mean, like, sometimes when we have our stories, the idea there should be chinks in the armor of everything, much like telling a story through the eyes of a unreliable narrator. Hell, even the science fiction game Eclipse Phase is told from the point of view of unreliable narrators, which, while at the same time, the narrator is giving you what through their eyes what is concrete facts. In reality, what they're giving you are distorted views of what the world is like. So, for example, in if humanity, because of a cataclysm, had to travel and find refuge in the calderas, maybe there's evidence that this wasn't an accident. This was on purpose. Maybe the people that were involved, like a druidic cult that's forcing humanity to go to the calderas to awaken a dead god or something. Maybe part of the druidic cult is like they're not on the same page, or maybe they have imperfect information, or the what humanity remembers from the past and where they want to go in the future doesn't align. The dream doesn't align with the reality of said thing. Much like our current today, our current motivations today, right? We have an ideal of how we would like to live life and how humanity should go, but then there's the practical application of said thing, and usually things get foobarred before once it's exposed to the world, and so yeah. Yeah, there may be a thing. Now Ricker's talking about like maybe a Caldera war or something. East versus west slopes of the Caldera, giant trebuchet flinging their projectiles across the lake. Yeah, not that they're quite huge enough to begin with, but this is fantasy. Although I suppose seeing from a distance on the horizon giant trebuchets poking up above the rim of the caldera, flinging things at each other, might be a sight to see, but it would be kind of cool though. Although, what a weird, strange battle if you have like a lake in the middle with like ships and outer perimeter ring where people are living or something. That would the battle of the image of a battle in the bowl of a caldera would look pretty strange. Now, I don't know about a massive war, but I could see a conflict happening that way. Trebuchets, maybe on a lower level, maybe amongst some of the islands or something, or someone's making a play to get rid of a particular community or faction or something, and they've assembled enough personnel and materials and things like that to assault a section, which in a bad way means that the people there, with a bounded location, it's not very many places you can run to. You can't just back off and retreat and lick your wounds, right? Everyone's stuck in the same bowl, the same haven. So I could see there that if a major battle started, it could be pretty deadly to begin with. Yeah, 20-story trebuchets standing at the lake's edge, looking like massive towers. Well, remember we did talk about the idea of like massive towers. I think it was the reference was from Dragonlance, with the massive towers poking out of the top of the caldera. So I don't know. You could go pretty fantastical with it. Big giant monoliths or something like poking up. Who built these darn things? I don't know. We most fantasy involves very fantastical locations, even those that are constructed, but no one's ever really constructing them. They either exist or they don't. There's very little in between where you see like dwarves are like, oh, we got to build this thing. How long is it going to take us? 700 years. Oh, we better get started. You very rarely see like construction sites and such in fantasy, but how weird or fun or crazy would that be? Especially if you have airships, maybe attaching themselves to towers, some kind of tower or rod or cables or something might be better than landing on like a solid surface. Might be too dangerous. So somehow, some way, I don't know, before the cataclysm hit and people were forced to flee to the calderas, maybe there were these small but eccentric groups of people that were using calderas because they just knew that the cataclysm was going to come, and everyone else is like, yeah, right, whatever. There's another ice age, whatever. Right, and then come to find out, like, oh, that's why they made those giant towers that led up to nowhere. Maybe that's the case when the earth opens up from earthquakes and poisonous gases start rolling across the landscape or something, or I don't know, the ground opens up and giant tentacles start reaching out and swallowing whole cities, and they're like, the only safe places are the calderas. Rick says both sides fighting over the southern slope, which has a much less steep incline, so it's optimal for farming. Yeah, you can make so many different landscapes, I think, if you're willing to accept the fact that it's not just completely poisonous and lifeless. Yeah, you can make lots of like maybe. I've always loved the idea of those hillside or mountainside stepped farming plateaus. I don't know how to explain them. Farming steppes or something. I think some of them exist in like Japan. There's other places around the world where people have like farmed steep inclines and flattened them out or whatever. And I think it's so cool to look at. Although I don't think I've ever encountered it in fantasy in any way, shape, or form. But maybe there's something like that where there's more of an industry, and there could be this weird dichotomy of like humanity fleeing to a place that's wild, but bringing with them their industry with them, so that they do have a lot of times in fantasy there's like lost knowledge, like a dark ages. Very very rarely do we see like the fall of humanity without the fall of the knowledge that comes with it. So I could see just people bringing their own ingenuity to a place like this and then trying to reapply what it would look like in this world. Where you have to farm on like weird, strange angles, or come up with new types of sailing vessels or something. Maybe they need to be shallower and wider for some reason, or constructed from a different material that can survive the heat, and or maybe sailing across the lake that's in the caldera in the first place. You have to worry about not just like It's not really worrying about waves or something, but you have to worry about, I don't know, invasive algae patches and geysers and I don't know, flame plumes and poisonous gas burps or something like that or whatever. Maybe there's something about that, and of course, maybe there's maybe a very strange, maybe far more swamp-like than ocean or lake-like aquatic realm. Simply because unlike a river or an ocean, there's very little aquatic turmoil. So maybe there's like a thick growth on the top, and there's people and creatures that live below with thick algae and some proto seaweed or something like that. Like you could really twist some of the aspects of the world. Heck, maybe there's even a proto type of gas mask and goggles or something and hazmat suits that people have to wear, similar in shape and style to like the old diving suits with the big giant brass helmets or something. Or I don't know. You could go if you wanted to go more technological with it. I could see that happening as well. Rickard says, or having a double caldera where the nobility live in the inner caldera and the trebuchets are on the outsides to keep the outer caldera people away. Oh yeah. I didn't think about bringing this up, but you could even have them. You could have layered calderas like concentric circles. You could have them blend together much like the Olympic circles. So, and each of them could be different, merged together horizontally and a vertical method as well. Like I could imagine a waterfall coming from, say, one caldera that spills over into another caldera because of their height differences. Maybe there are, if a caldera was created from an impact crater, who's to say that there aren't other off-centered impact craters inside of this giant impact crater? So the entire impact crater is filled with water, but maybe there's like three smaller impact craters to the north, and then one giant inner impact crater to the south, and maybe there is a half impact crater that was smaller back in the past until the larger one impacted. So you have like this half circle inside the caldera's lip or something like that. Like you could portray this with like with naturally occurring vanguards and buttresses and barriers and fortifications, but it just they happen to be semicircles all over the place, right? I'm sure with someone who has a deft hand at map making, I've seen some round cities being used with map making tools. I don't know how to do it myself, but that would be kind of cool to have like concentric circles from above. Maybe they look like these massive city states, but from the same horizontal plane, all you see are these, humanity slightly at the tops of these calderas. And of course, again, like you were saying, Rickard, with if one side of the caldera has a less aggressive incline than the other side, the same could be said for how the caldera, the volcanic area, is shaped, where maybe there's a big, massive peak at one side of the caldera and the other side is kind of angled out so that maybe it's a barrier against heavy weather, or maybe it creates really massive like airstreams or something, or it collects a lot of moisture from clouds that pass over top, and that causes a lot of maybe storms or mudslides, or fills the basin with moisture over particular seasons. So during the dry season, maybe there are structures that exist at the bottom of the caldera, and you could walk amongst the city. Maybe some of the city streets and things are a little moist, but you can still walk among them. But then when the rain season comes in and the storm clouds roll in, it becomes like a vortex of sorts, and it dumps a lot of moisture, and then maybe it fills it back up, which would be an odd ecological manifestation of people that are both aquatic and land based, and they live in an open air city one season, and then it's completely submerged another season. Kind of weird. But anyway, World Building Wednesday. We've come to the end of our talk here. I want to thank all of you for for joining me in our discussion. Yes, you can. Of course, you can always find all aspects of the giant playlist. I don't know. It's probably 70 or 80 videos, 80 hours long of our various world buildings and things of that nature. But anyway, tomorrow is Third Pillar Thursday, Third Pillar of Exploration. Please join me there. That's my personal passion in the tabletop RPG community, that it is a muscle that has become atrophied over time, that we don't utilize the environment both narratively and mechanically as much as I think we should. And so the Caldera is going to lend itself to a lot of really funky things that we can pull from and put in our back pocket, in our toolkit or whatnot. So please join me then. But anyway, thank you very much for being part of this show. I thank you all out there. Please like, share, subscribe. Heck, even follow over on Twitch. I would love to become an affiliate over there. As a matter of fact, today I saw some changes and such, which is very good for a show that comes across 1 hour each day, Monday through Friday. So join me there as well. Guys, everyone, have a great day. I will see thee tomorrow.